When they discover that a demonic clown has returned to torment the inhabitants of their hometown, 7 friends decide to get together again after 30 years with the mission of eliminating him. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, It, from 1990. One Sunday morning, while her mother collects the clothes from the clothesline, Lori Ann pedals alone through the neighborhood. When she realizes it's about to rain, Mrs. Winterbarger asks her daughter to come home and goes inside to put her clothes away. Just then, Lori Ann spots a clown hiding among the sheets and ends up being attacked by it. Minutes later, Mrs. Winterbarger notices that her daughter is missing and goes after her, then finds Lori Ann's body next to the tricycle. Desperate, the woman calls the ambulance, but it's too late and the police have to be called to solve the crime. In the last few weeks, 6 children have been attacked in the city and the police still have no idea who could be responsible for these crimes. Dissatisfied with the incompetence of the detectives, Mike, a librarian who lives in the area, decides to start an investigation on his own. As a child, he and his friends went through a similar situation and had to face a bizarre clown in order to survive. Luckily, all the members of the group came out of the battle unscathed and promised each other that if that thing was still alive and came back to terrorize the children, they would unite again to fight it. When he receives the news of Pennywise's return, Bill is stunned and remembers the day his brother was eliminated. The young boy was playing in the rain with the little boat he got from his older brother when he met the clown, who lived hidden in the manholes. When he stretched out his arm to retrieve his paper boat, Georgie was attacked and, ever since, Bill has never been able to shake the feeling of guilt for having given it to his brother. That evening, he informs his wife that he needs to take care of something urgent in his hometown and says goodbye to Audra to go to Derry to fulfill his promise. Meanwhile, Mike calls the other members of the group to inform them of Pennywise's return, but Stan doesn't take the news very well. When he discovers that Pennywise is back after 30 years, he is completely stunned and decides to go for a swim. Of all his friends, Stan was the most fearful and that didn't change over time. Back then, after discovering the existence of the monstrous clown, the youngsters banded together to try and defeat him and began to train their combat skills. The children believed that the thing could be defeated if it was hit with silver, so they decided to break into the abandoned factory where the creature lived to carry out the attack. When he realized that the group of nerds were invading the place, Henry Bowers and his friends, who were considered the school bullies, decided to go after them to scare them off. To set a trap, they had to split up and one of the delinquents went down to the basement alone to scare the young men while Henry and Belch prepared to capture them. However, when he reaches the tunnels, the man realizes that he is not alone and is brutally eliminated by the clown. Meanwhile, Henry and Belch go into hiding to capture their first victim and Stan is the chosen one. However, before the bullies had a chance to hurt the young man, Pennywise appeared and blew up the pipes to capture one of the children. As he was closest to the explosion, Belch ended up being taken away and the monster returned to carry out its next attack. Seeing the enemy approaching, Stan gets up and manages to run away while Henry is paralyzed by the strong light. The young man then runs to find his friends and they all end up being hit by the flash, but this time no one is taken. To ensure that everyone survives the attack, the 7 friends join hands to form a circle, as they know that the clown can only take one child at a time. However, Pennywise uses his powers to trick them and Stan ends up being captured. Seeing his friend about to be devoured, Eddie splashes acid in the clown's face and Beverly hits the enemy with a slingshot. After being hit by a silver bullet, the creature suffers a serious head injury and decides to escape down the drain that leads to the sewer. At this point, the team decides to leave the factory and head for the forest, where they swear an oath that if the clown is still alive, they will unite again to destroy him. A few minutes after Stan enters the bathroom, his wife notices that he is taking too long to get out of the shower and decides to go after him. However, when Patty enters the bathroom, she finds her husband in the bathtub all wounded and discovers that he has taken his own life. Upon arriving in Derry, Bill goes to visit his brother's grave and sees Pennywise digging 7 new graves, one of which is already closed. Even though he's terrified, Bill says he's not afraid of the clown and then he disappears. That afternoon, he goes to the town library to find his old friend and Mike is delighted to see him. During a brief conversation, Bill reveals that he doesn't remember many events from his childhood, as if all the clown's memories were repressed. Since he never left the city, Mike remembers everything that happened and says that his friend's memory will gradually clear up, since he is now back. To help him recover his memories, Mike gives Bill his old bike and reveals that he found it in a pawn shop. By touching it, Bill triggers an old memory in which he and Stan were running away from a stalker. Minutes later, Richie arrives at the library looking for Mike and finds that he has just left, so he decides to sit down and wait for him. At that moment, he begins to hear the clown's voice and realizes that he is reading a newspaper upstairs. Suddenly there is a shower of balloons, but apparently only Richie is able to see what is happening. When they explode, the balloons splatter blood everywhere and the man becomes desperate, so he decides to leave. Before leaving, Richie leaves a message with the receptionist and asks her to tell Mike to meet him that evening. Meanwhile, Bill and Mike are taking a bike ride around the city to reminisce about their childhood. Then they decide to start a card game, but when they open the deck they see the image of the clown drawn on the back of all the cards and realize that they are not alone. That afternoon, Ben has just arrived in town and is on his way to the hotel when he decides to stop in the middle of the road to take a walk in the woods where he used to play with his friends. Just then, he sees a young man running away from a group of bullies and remembers that he used to pass that same road while running away from Henry and his colleagues. When the boys leave, Ben comes over and helps the young boy clean his knee wound, as he has hurt himself falling to the ground. Soon after, the young man leaves and Ben accesses a memory from the past where he sees a skeleton walking over the lake. As he closes his eyes, he feels someone's hand touch his shoulder and is startled, but soon realizes it's just a homeless man asking for money and runs back to the cab. Suddenly, Ben spots the clown on the side of the road and discovers that he is being followed by him. Before meeting his friends, Eddie decides to pay a visit to the pharmacy and meets Mr. Keene, the pharmacist who served him when he was a child. However, when Eddie approaches, Pennywise possesses the old man's body and orders the young man to leave as soon as he can. Upon arriving in Derry, Beverly's first stop is her father's house, as she hasn't seen him since she left the city. So Beverly rings the doorbell of her old house and discovers that someone else is now living there, as her father perished 5 years ago. When she discovers that the young woman lived in that house during her childhood, Mrs. Kirsch invites her to tea and Beverly accepts. However, when she takes the first sip, she realizes that the container is full of blood and ends up knocking over the cup. As she stoops to pick up the pieces, Mrs. Kirsch begins to act suspiciously and advises Beverly to leave town while there is still time. When the old woman gets up, Beverly realizes that her appearance has changed and is startled to see the monstrous creature before her eyes. Immediately, the young woman runs out of the house and spots the clown at the front door. Terrified, she ends up in the middle of the street and is almost run over by a truck, but the vehicle manages to swerve in time. That night, Ben and Eddie meet in a restaurant and then Bill and Mike show up to meet them. Even though they've been apart for decades, the friendship between the members of the group remains strong, and when they meet, it's as if they've never been apart. Shortly afterwards, Richie arrives at the scene and, on seeing his old friends, runs to the bathroom to pull himself together, as he is completely terrified. After calming down, he goes to meet his companions and, while they are celebrating, Beverly appears. Seeing her old friend, everyone is enchanted by her beauty and suddenly Beverly faints, but is supported by the group. Minutes later, the woman wakes up and hugs each of her colleagues, then reveals that, upon meeting them again, all her childhood memories returned and she ended up losing consciousness. When she sees Bill, Beverly greets him with a kiss, as she was in love with him when they were both young. Now that they're all together, the 6 friends reveal that they met Pennywise when they arrived in town, and Bill claims that the clown is trying to scare them because he's scared too. During the conversation, the image of the monster appears in Eddie's mind and he begins to cry, because Pennywise is responsible for the biggest trauma of his entire life. While trying to comfort his friend, the colleagues realize that Stan hasn't arrived yet and decide to start the investigation without him, as Mike isn't sure if his fearful friend will show up. However, before facing elimination up close once again, the group decides to celebrate, as this is the first time they are all back together after high school. Over dinner, the friends take the opportunity to talk about their personal lives and comment on the tragic end of Henry Bowers. After almost being eliminated by Pennywise, the delinquent went completely mad and took the blame for the elimination of all the young people in the town who disappeared at the time. Since then, he has been locked up in a mental institution and has never been able to recover his sanity. Now that he knows that the people who almost eliminated him years ago are back in town, the clown decides to go after Henry and asks for his help in getting rid of them. Knowing that the man harbors a lot of resentment towards that group, the clown tells him that he will have another chance to get revenge and says that he will help him eliminate all of them. After dinner, Richie says that he really enjoyed spending the evening with his friends, but reveals that he'll be catching a flight home the next morning. When questioned by Beverly, the man says that he is not willing to relive the same nightmare of 30 years ago, so he has decided to leave. Upon hearing this, the rest of the team tries to talk him out of it, but Mike asks everyone to calm down and says that Richie has every right to leave. After all, his life will be in danger if he decides to continue the mission. Before paying the bill, the 6 friends open their fortune cookies and, instead of finding a written message, they find bizarre creatures coming out of them, so they decide to run away. They then go to Mike's house, who calls Stan to check that he is on his way. When she hears the phone ring, Patty answers and informs him that her husband perished the night before. When he finds out that Stan is eliminated, Mike feels guilty. After all, his friend took his life after receiving his call. At that moment, Bill remembers the vision he had in the cemetery, in which one of the graves was closed, and realizes that the clown already knew about the elimination of one of the team members. The summer it all happened, Stan was the last person to see the monster, but he insisted on denying reality, saying that Pennywise was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. However, in August, while cycling through the park, Bill reveals that he saw Stan running as if he was being chased by something and got on the back of his bike so that they could both get away. When asked who was after him, Stan said that he was birdwatching when he suddenly heard a voice calling out to him. In an attempt to find out who was trying to communicate, the young man followed the sound coming from an abandoned house and ended up getting trapped inside. Suddenly, the young man saw a mummy coming down the stairs and kept trying to open the door until he managed to escape. Devastated by the news of Stan's elimination, Mike opens the fridge to get a drink and dozens of colorful balloons come out of it. Then the group spots Stan's head on the shelf, saying terrible things to try to destabilize them. Realizing that Pennywise is in charge, Mike closes the fridge door violently and suddenly all the lights go out. Soon after, a strong gust of wind breaks the glass in the windows and knocks all the books off the shelves, leaving the 6 friends in a panic. When it starts to rain inside the room, the team members hold hands to form a circle and stick together until things return to normal. Meanwhile, during the night, Henry is visited by the ghost of his old friend and Belch says he will help him get out of that place. To do this, the man will have to get past the guards, so the ghost hands him a penknife and tells him what to do. When he sees the inmate approaching the gate, Kuntz prepares to take him back to his room, but is surprised by the arrival of the clown, who turns into a dog to attack him. At that moment, Mike and his friends are investigating why Pennywise has returned now, exactly 30 years after the last attack that took place in that town. Curiously, every 30 years, Derry suffers a major historical disaster. In 1960, there was a fire at the Black Spot Club. In 1930, there was an explosion at a large company in the city, and in 1900, the terrible attack on the Drake Cliff. All this leads us to believe that the clown was responsible for all these catastrophes, and, in this year, 1990, a new attack is taking place. After her husband left the house in a daze and never heard from her again, Audra decided to go after him because she was very worried. After several hours of travel, the woman stops in the middle of the road to ask for directions and discovers that there are only a few kilometers to go before she reaches Derry. At that moment, while talking to the gas station attendant, Audra encounters the clown for the first time and is mesmerized by his menacing gaze. Meanwhile, Bill and his friends go to a hotel, where they intend to spend the night and rest, as the investigation will take place the next morning. However, when he enters his room, Mike is attacked by Henry, who grabs him from behind and strikes him in the chest with the penknife he received from the clown. Meanwhile, Ben receives a visit from Beverly and the woman starts kissing him. In his teens, Ben was in love with the girl, but he always knew she liked Bill. So at that moment, when he sees Beverly proposing to him, Ben suspects that something is wrong, but he's so happy that he finally has the chance to kiss her that he decides to ignore his instincts. However, when he looks in the mirror, he notices that his beloved is wearing colorful clothes and soon discovers that he has been tricked by the clown. Immediately, Ben runs out of the room and hears Mike's call for help. Just then, he and Eddie break down the door and pull Henry off his friend. When he was pushed, the criminal fell on top of the knife and ended up piercing his own heart. After Henry's perishment, Ben and Eddie drag Mike out of his room and ask his friends to help them get him to hospital, as he has lost a lot of blood. The librarian was already unconscious when he was attended to and his friends are anxiously awaiting the doctor's return. As dawn breaks, Beverly is increasingly anxious to find out what will happen to Mike and Ben remains by her side to support her. At that moment, the man gathers up the courage to declare himself to his friend and is surprised to find that she reciprocates. While the couple are kissing, Eddie shows up to tell them that Mike is out of surgery and the doctor says he'll be fine, but he's still weak. With the doctor's permission, Bill enters the room to visit his friend and Mike asks him to get the silver bullets from his jacket pocket. Those are the same bullets Beverly used to wound Pennywise 3 decades ago, and Mike reveals that he went back to the sewer to get them 10 years ago. Knowing that he won't be able to accompany his friends from then on, Mike assures them that he won't blame them if they decide to leave. Upon returning to the hotel, the group meets to decide what to do with Henry's body, as they don't intend to involve the police in the case. For some reason, Bill and Beverly believe that if they involve the police, something bad will happen to another member of the team, so they all decide to leave the body in there until someone finds it. In an attempt to save time, Richie turns the TV on full blast and Eddie hangs a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the doorknob. Before closing the door, Richie hears an announcement on the news and learns that a 5-year-old girl was playing near the house when she was attacked. As he passes the reception desk, Bill hears a piano sound coming from somewhere nearby and sees himself sitting next to his mother as he enjoys the beautiful song. When he arrives at the garage, he finds that all his friends are on their way to the airport, but he says he won't leave town until the case is solved. The man believes that if he does this, he will never be able to have a clear conscience again and will end up going mad, as he will no longer be able to differentiate his nightmares from reality. Seeing the despair in Bill's eyes, his friends come together to hug him and end up changing their minds about leaving. That afternoon, the group drives into the forest and prepares to hike to the abandoned factory. Before starting the walk, Bill hands Beverly the silver bullets and the woman picks up her old slingshot to use once again in this battle. When they arrive at the factory, the friends go down the stairs of a tunnel that leads to the sewer and find a bag that was apparently left there recently. On checking the documents found inside, Bill realizes that the bag belongs to his wife and then discovers that Pennywise has captured her. Terrified, he runs through the tunnels while screaming for Audra, and his friends go after him. When they find him, they realize that Bill is suffering from a panic attack and Beverly tells him that he needs to calm down, as this is the only way to find his wife. With the support of his friends, Bill manages to pull himself together and continue his investigation. After a few minutes' walk, they arrive at exactly the same spot where they last saw the monster and begin to look for clues to Audra's location. Suddenly, Bill spots a paper boat approaching and bends down to pick it up. At that moment, he comes across George wearing a raincoat and the young boy accuses him of being responsible for his perishment. Bill is then consumed by guilt, but manages to cope and orders the clown to appear. When challenged, Pennywise allows the group to see his projected image and states that this is the last chance they will have to leave. At this point, Bill understands why there is an attack on the city every 30 years, because the clown needs to eat after waking up from his hibernation period. In order to feed, the clown needs to materialize in a physical form, and only when it does, can it be eliminated. So Bill believes that Pennywise is hiding somewhere down there and drops the paper boat into the water, hoping that it will guide them to the clown. Following the boat, the group finds a pile of human bones around a small wooden door and decides to go through it to find out what's on the other side. At that moment, they come across countless bodies stuck to the ceiling in a kind of web, and among them is Audra's body. When he spots his wife, Bill immediately starts climbing the walls to save her. However, the rescue is interrupted when a giant spider approaches and the 5 friends have to hide to avoid becoming the next victims. When she comes across the materialized form of the monstrous clown, Beverly takes out her slingshot to attack him, but ends up missing every shot. To prevent his prey from escaping, the monster hypnotizes them with the light emitted from inside his body, and, while trying to save his friends, Eddie ends up being captured. The man is about to be eliminated when Beverly finds one of the silver bullets she threw and bets everything on one last shot. This time, it manages to hit the inside of the enemy's body and Pennywise moves away. When the light emission is interrupted, the 3 friends manage to regain consciousness and Eddie falls to the ground. However, when he was captured, he was seriously injured and did not survive. Determined to avenge the elimination of another member of their team, the 4 surviving friends go after the arachnid and take advantage of the fact that he is weakened to attack him. Together, they manage to remove the creature's heart and eliminate it once and for all. When he realizes that the monster can no longer move, Bill goes after his wife and takes her into the forest. After that day, Mike was finally able to feel at peace, as he now knew that the attacks on the inhabitants of his town had come to an end. As for the rest of the team, they all went back to their old lives, except for Ben and Beverly, who decided to get married and start a family. Although she survived the Pennywise attack, Audra was never the same after that day and lived in a trance-like state for several months. One day, when he was about to leave the city of Derry, Bill decided to make one last attempt to bring his wife back, since no psychiatric treatment had been able to do that. After putting her on his old bike, the man cycled aimlessly through the city and, along the way, Audra managed to shake off the strong influence she had suffered from being hypnotized by Pennywise. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.